Alrighty, let's talk about Diablo. I'm going to be looking over here a lot because I have written an entire fucking thing on what I want to talk about because I have found myself wanting to talk about the game, and I like the game, and I really enjoy the game. I think the base game of this Diablo 4 is very good. It obviously, as you saw, has things I want to talk about and issues that should be fixed, but I do want to say I'm going to be looking over here a lot because normally I don't take the time or effort to actually write out anything for a video, so here we are. It's me looking to this side. So first and foremost, like I said, the game is great. The base game, I think, has a very solid foundation. The skill tree, the Paragon stuff, it's decent, it needs work. But overall, I have been enjoying playing this game a lot. I think it's actually really good and a lot of fun. But, as always, we want to talk more about the negative things and the criticisms more than the positive things, because the good things are good. They don't need to be talked about. They don't need to necessarily be mentioned, like the art design, the world, the story, some of the animations, the sound design. Good, good game. It did a fantastic job. But let's talk a little bit about the negatives. So first and foremost, I want to talk a bit about loot. Loot is kind of weird in this game, and it's mainly revolving around the item power system. Items can drop... Actually, let me go up to my stash real quick so I can have a visual aid for this. Items can drop either normal, sacred, or ancestral, dictated by the glow or lack thereof on the items. The main thing this dictates, and the main thing this really means, is after 725 item power, the item will be... all of the secondary stats in the item that you see there, like the lucky hit chance or the crit chance, that kind of thing, those will be the highest possible tier of rolls that you can currently get because it's an ancestral piece, it's above 725. So all you want to do, you want to have an item at least of that item power value so you can get those rolls on an item. Excuse me. The main thing item power does for items is for jewelry, it has a higher resistance on them. For weapons, it has a higher DPS, which is very important for the weapon you're using for your skill. Berserkers are kind of weird, where they have 4 weapons, but 3 of them are primarily just stat sticks, realistically, depending on the build you're running. So you have all of these different weapons. The DPS on your main weapon is what matters the most, and the item power on different gear armor pieces is the base armor value. So once you cross that 725 threshold, those items can seemingly be the best in slot items forever that you get. But the problem is those items can drop from any content in the game, regardless of difficulty, even as low as level 50. The moment you can get into T4, the moment ancestral items can start showing up, is the moment you could have items that are best in slot forever to drop, which some may think is a good thing, but I personally think it severely takes away from the game as a whole in terms of its progression cycles. But from what I have noticed from my playtime, item power seems to scale slightly with your level. The higher level you are, generally the higher item power stuff will drop. But because how RNG stuff is, you can drop items at level 50, for example, that are stronger than items that you will be dropping consistently at level 100. It is a lower chance, I believe, but that item power will be higher, or can be higher, which makes it kind of awkward. The one thing that is also weird in that situation is when you drop an item, the item is bound to your account, depending if you put a legendary power on it or enchant it. The item is bound to your account, but requires a certain level to equip. So if I was level 50 and I dropped this item, it would require level 50 to equip, not 78, even though the item is essentially an endgame piece of equipment. This is kind of very odd because as you're leveling up and as you're making new characters, it becomes difficult to gear and add things effectively to other characters. For example, I have these decent pair of boots that are they're just good move speed boots, right? I could get rid of the berserking duration, and there's no class restriction on these boots, and any class I make can wear these. But the problem being that those classes, regardless of them even being able to drop, because the moment they're in T4, level 50, the moment they can be in T4, these boots could drop for them, even be better at rolls than these, but they can't equip them. I think it is problematic for alternate characters and potentially for other, even if you want to make the same character but have a different build, that you're unable to use equipment that you personally drop, even though the character who would be wearing them could drop literally the same exact piece of armor. It seems very weird. I don't really know why there's an item level requirement to these things. There's also a level requirement to different variants of legendary power, but they have no real effect on the strength of the power, which I find weird. So for example, if I enchanted an item with this legendary power, it would make the item level 17 required to wear. If the base item was at or below level 17. But I have another one of those powers here, which is significantly worse, but requires level 73, and would put that requirement on any item you would equip it to. It just seems very odd, the level required system, and I think it's detrimental to basically wanting to play other stuff and being able to give items to your other characters, even if they're like decent items but not that great. Until they'll probably farm better items before they'll even get to the level to be able to even use them, which I think is a bit of a problem. Alright, next point. Class-specific unique items, I do not believe, drop enough. For example, if I wanted to play with, there's a specific two-handed mace that is an upheaval hammer. I think it's after you upheaval, you leave like a flame patch on the ground that'll do bonus damage, and could be a build-defining unique. Once you get into T4, you're able to drop different uniques. It took me until level 80 to drop a pair of these gloves. I dropped another pair at 85. But for example, if I wanted to make a Frenzy Barbarian, I have dropped 3 Frenzy necks, and I cannot equip any of them till level 83. Or, sorry, level 80 to 83, which goes back to the leveling thing. But these very specific class-based uniques are cool, and things I would like to have a little earlier, honestly. There are very rare uniques, like the Shaco or the Grandfather, which are multi-class, incredibly strong uniques. I think it's fine if those things stay relatively rare, or those things are found mainly in more difficult content, because having a character chase is always good, right? I think that'll always be a good thing to have that character chase, but I think class-specific uniques should probably drop a little more than they currently do, because there are multiple class-specific uniques that I haven't seen once on this character. I have seen 4 or 5 of these swords. I have seen 3 of these two-handed swords. I have 2 of the same chest here. I'm wearing the 3rd one. I have seen 5 Frostburn gloves. But these gloves are not... But these things are not unique. There's a couple different items, like... This comes from the main story. Razor Plate can be equipped by anybody. Frostburn can be equipped by anybody. Penitent can be equipped by anybody. But I have seen a significant amount of uniques that are not specific to my class. And because those uniques are build-defining, not being able to even get them by the time I'm basically in the endgame, doesn't feel too great, personally. Maybe I'm just kind of going, oh, I wish I had the shiny thing. But I really think that even if there was some, like, weekly event or some way you could try and target some of these items, or even like a specific dungeon or dungeon type that could maybe get them better for you. I don't know. just a better way to actually try and get build defining uniques. To be fair, it is possible that that sort of target farming exists in the game. It's possible. I don't think it is. But we have such a severe lack of information currently as the game is so brand new that we have not seen or know a lot about some. For example, the Shaco. There is one confirmed of those helmets in the world. In the entire world. One helmet confirmed. Now, rare is rare, but I honestly think that's a little too much, especially for people who want min-max and want to really be able to push their characters as hard as they can, because an item like that is so incredibly powerful that it is a massive difference having it and not having it. And only one character in the world having it? Kind of weird. But we'll get to potentially better ways to farm that later. On top of that, on top of the RNG with items, because obviously you have to drop them with the correct stats. Even then, if you drop an item and it has the correct stats, or you're trying to make a more BIS or better in-game item, the not all, but a lot of the legendary powers are also have a significant amount of variance in them. For example, let's take this necklace and this necklace effect. You can get this Edgemaster effect out of a dungeon, and you can get the base variant of it, right? But that base variant is 15%. You can get this thing and its variant up to 30%, right? So that's pretty good. That's pretty strong. But here's the problem. The fact that you can get an item like this and it will deal literally double damage as a secondary layer of RNG, while we do drop a lot of legendaries. I mean, I do have some decent ones. I have some higher rolls. This is the only perfect rolled Whirlwind Critical Strike Chance legendary I have seen, and it's on one of the weapons I have. I don't know if I like almost double the power of a legendary power also being an additional layer of RNG. But, I mean, realistically, you can farm them up, you can get them, you'll get some things that are close. I have 2 of these that are pretty good, like I have on my sword here. So I have 1 extra. I have found only 1 other legendary power in the game, like this one. I think it's down... Yeah. I have found 1 on this ring, which I have moved over to this one, and I found this one. The entire time of playing, I found 2. There are ways to potentially target farm specific legendary effects by either doing PvP content or world content, giving you items where you can focus purchase rings or boots or helmets that will have that specific legendary effect on it, where you can try to target farm it that way. But realistically, it feels a little too much. I wouldn't say too much. It is just something that I kind of hope gets a little look and a little tweak at, but honestly could kind of stay the same as it is. But the main thing I wanted to, at least the takeaway from just kind of talking about loot in general, is that the moment you get into T4, you can drop literally the best items in the game, or you can drop what 99.9% of times are complete and utter garbage. Yes, it's an ARPG. Yes, it is gotta find the loot to get better, which I am totally down for. However, I think the loot variance should decrease the higher level and the higher amount of content that you do, meaning that the harder stuff you do, the more rewarded you feel. Because currently, the way it stands with loot RNG is because it is just pure RNG for the most part, it seems like. We are mainly just farming the easiest, most brain-dead kind of content that you can to just roll the dice more instead of actually trying to do more difficult content to be rewarded further for that kind of content instead. Next up, I want to talk about the level scaling in the game. The entire world and every single dungeon in it scales to your level up to level 95. A lot of people like level scaling. Level scaling does allow you to play with people who are significantly lower or significantly higher than you in level. This level scaling does let you play with other people, but the problem becomes later on if you want to try any different build, because the entire world has significantly scaled to your level, all the way up to level 95, even if you're when you're level 100, the bonuses you gain from over leveling the content are not enough to overtake the fact that you will have to build an entirely brand new set of gear and legendary powers to be able to actually attempt to run builds efficiently. If I tried to swap over my build and literally just play with the gear I have, this completely different build without completely re-rolling, restatting, outside of a couple items, trying to find specific bonuses to specific skills and specific slots, like let's say my gloves would need upheaval instead of whirlwind, but because I've rolled crit instead of that, I'd need to find completely different gloves to have any form of additional effect to actually be strong enough. Basically, it really hurts any sort of build diversity and experimentation as you get higher level, because the world is hard enough that even though, yeah, I'm level 85 and I have pretty damn good gear, I can still die just as easily to everything. So that scaling, I think, should probably be looked at and addressed and stopped at a certain level, maybe the 70 to 75, potentially level 80 range. I think the 65 to 70 range is probably the best point for level scaling to stop, and then at that, maybe, honestly, the capstone dungeon to get into T4 is level 70, so maybe let's say level 80, right? To get into once you're into T4, that way you can not feel as bad because you're over leveling stuff, so you can try different builds, figure out what you like. You can still do farming in normal dungeons with mobs at level 80, but because the world would be capped at level 80, it would also promote the end game activities, which are the nightmare dungeons. The nightmare dungeons in the game scale based on the tier of the dungeon. They only scale to the tier, so every level goes up. I think tier 52 is like level 104s, 105s in terms of the dungeons. So as you hit level 80, you can start doing your nightmare dungeons, you can start killing things a little above your level, you can level up more efficiently, that kind of thing. And while scaling does have its benefits, I think overall the negative aspects of scaling kind of rear their head the later you get into the game. But now to move on to the next. Sorry if it's honestly it's kind of weird talking like this because I'm trying to read off this and I get a feel for it and then I get a little rambly and then I go back to it. But we'll do what we can, right? We'll do what we can. I put the effort into writing this down to be as less rambly as possible. So we'll get there. We'll get there. Now let's talk about how they have patched the game realistically. Nerfs, 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 some more nerfs, a little extra nerf, a little more nerf on the side, and then I think Necro's got a little bit of a little sip. They got a little buff in there. Just a little bit. Just a little buff in there. I think that nerfing things that are out of control, like how barbarians weren't scaling correctly, so they were doing billions of damage because how Edgemaster was interacting and compounding its damage on itself. Like that, infinite damage scaling, that's probably pretty bad. That's bad. There's a poison single target build that you can take where you're basically, once again, one-shotting the last boss in the game. Infinite scaling, once again, not great. But the main problem is, regardless of everything else, every single efficient farm players have tried to find and tried to do. For example, where is it? Mogon Works, nerfed. Runes of Edru, recently nerfed. Blind Burrows, nerfed. Champion's Demise, nerfed. Every single time players put a little effort in and find a better farming source, because there's no good end game farming root, material, whatever, all of the end game farming sucks. Also, going back to the fact that items can drop at any power from any content, meaning doing harder content doesn't really have nearly the reward that just doing brain dead easy content over and over again. So they've consistently nerfed the mob density, the elite spawn rate, and ruined these dungeons in terms of their efficiency, and really kind of put a bad taste in players' mouths and in my mouth too about what they have done. Also, when they do nerf these dungeons, because they know people enjoy them, they always put changes to elite spawn rates in dungeons. They don't tell you what they nerfed, or they don't tell you why they nerfed it. They don't give you any explanation. The transparency and communication has been very poor in that manner, and it feels like they're trying to shy away from saying that they nerfed them instead of adjusted the rates, because they don't want people to, I guess, feel negative over that kind of negative language. I don't. Ugh. Feels gross even so. But the main reason why people are doing these dungeons and doing these things efficiently is because the end game activities are not supportive and are not rewarding enough for players to actively want to do. There also have been nerfing legendary aspects. Those gloves I showed you, these unique gloves, got a pretty decent nerf on top of Barbarian getting nerfed. So these gloves got nerfed. All the Barbarian shouts got nerfed. The legendary effect that I'm using that I've only seen two of in my entire game time have been nerfed. But one of the things that these nerfs have been doing to these classes as well is it makes them feel and play way worse. If it was just flat damage, I think it would be a lot better. But one of the problems becomes when you start nerfing these kinds of builds over people that have gear like I do, which nearly max rolled cooldown reduction, nearly max rolled cooldown reduction, fury cost reduction, a unique chest that also reduces cooldown of non-ultimate skills. The fact that they're doing significant nerfs to these classes over these very niche setups that you need a lot of gear for, and you even need Paragon-specific points for. Where are they? Yeah, Martial, Shout cooldown nerf, or Shout nerf, not nerf, keep saying nerf. Shout cooldown reduction, and then killing an enemy has also a 10% chance to reduce the cooldowns of your shouts. So you need almost everything for these builds to even function at a certain point, which I guess is maybe what they're going for. But the main issue is with all of these nerfs, they have yet to buff other skills. I've never seen anybody play Ground Stomp, almost never. I've barely seen any Iron Skin. I've seen some, like, Thorns Barb meme builds playing, like, Iron Skin, but nobody really uses it. I have never seen Kick. I have never seen Charge. I used Leap a little bit during leveling, just because they put the mount at the beginning of Act 4 over halfway through the campaign, instead of giving it to you earlier. So I had to use a movement skill for that. I have maybe seen Rupture in a build video once. I think I saw Death Blow. I don't even know what the animation looks like for this skill. I have seen Steel Grasp and Death Blow only because I've watched Rob videos of him using them. I have never seen Ion Maelstrom used once by anyone ever. No double swing. I only know the animation of Upheaval because a mob that spawned from Call of the Ancients uses it. Like, they keep nerfing so many things, but nothing is being buffed or brought up to even out, to compensate. There's no fun in that, because all you're doing is nerfing what's decent, and you're not bringing anything up to that level, or even close to that level. You're just nerfing other stuff, and the stuff that gets nerfed is still the best. It's just worse than it was, and calling it a day. It feels really bad, and makes classes play significantly worse with how they have been doing their nerfs. And then moving on from just they keep nerfing everything and they don't buff anything. The current endgame loop is after completing the capstone dungeons, you have a level 100 Uber Lilith to kill over here. That is the end boss. You get to kill it once, and other than that, the end game content is Nightmare Dungeons. Nightmare Dungeons have a lot of potential, however, they are very underutilized and are currently a bit of a problem, personally, for me. The main the main reason for me that Nightmare Dungeons are a problem is that because you can find items way better by killing mobs way under leveled than you in just a random dungeon, the dungeons they continuously nerf over and over again, doing Nightmare Dungeons doesn't really feel that rewarding. You're gaining bonus power to your glyphs, so you are gaining a bit of power, but in terms of actual item drops, you're really not gaining that much. And even if there was a system in place to make the drops in these dungeons a little better, I have not really seen it, nor have I felt it in my time spent playing these Nightmare Dungeons. One thing I think... One thing I think they... So... Focus up. So moving on from this is all the endgame loop is... Also, when you activate... What's one I'm not going to do, because it's just bad for me. I'm not going to do this one, right? So this. When you activate a Nightmare Dungeon... Okay, cool, activated it. Oh, it's over here. Oh, it just happens to be literally the worst one to go to, funnily enough. So when you want to go to this Nightmare Dungeon, you can't just teleport to it. You have to teleport here or here, and you have to walk all the way through this ravine to the dungeon. Every single time. So let's say it takes me from popping the Nightmare Dungeon to teleporting, hitting the load screens, to walking here to here. Let's say it takes me about 3 to 4 minutes to do that. Over time, I am spending hours and hours and hours of my game time going to an activity, not doing an activity. And that sucks. And if you want to say, well, they want people in the open world, they want people seeing people going by. I mean, I have done the map complete. The map and the rewards have been completed. The Lilith statues have been clicked. I have done the open world. I don't need nor want to do it anymore. Also, there are activities such as, I don't think there's one up right now, such as World Boss or Legion events that you have to walk to, which I'm totally fine with, which then populates the earth as you're seeing people teleport and run to the area. Those instances are sharded and capped at a certain amount of people to stop lag, that kind of thing. But I think it's a pretty significant issue that I'm going to be spending a lot of my time going to where I want to go instead of doing the thing I want to do. That will weigh on players as they play more. I have certainly seen comments on Reddit, for example, talking about this kind of thing of, oh, what? You can't just walk the... No, I don't fucking want to. You can if you want to, but I don't want to. So if they want to keep the immersion of the game, shit, dude, go in the settings, give us a gameplay toggle that says teleport to dungeon entrance, right? Or ask, hey, do you want to teleport to the dungeon entrance after you pop a Nightmare Dungeon? Yeah, sure, I'd like to. Or I could walk it if I felt like it, you know? As an endgame activity, the world has been done, the things have been completed, let me get to farming and killing mobs. One of the other issues with that is, in terms of walking, one of the bigger issues with these dungeons as a whole is there's not a lot in them. You spend a lot of time walking from here to here. Here, fucking dude, I'll bring up paint. We'll paint this bitch up, right? Look, let's say you have a dungeon and it kind of goes like this, and it goes like this. I think this is like Alderwood or something as a map that kind of... There's basically a decent amount of maps that are kind of like figure eights, right? And they have this middle path, and then they want you to kill stuff here, here, and then one like over here to open up this shiny blue gate. So you can go over here and then do the whole fucking thing in a little different area. That's another little loop-de-loop, right? There is a lot of walking in these dungeons. Like, if I was just shredding through mobs as I was going, like, if I could literally walk into a dungeon and hold Whirlwind and just my way all the way through this fucking dungeon, all the way through, just all spin a little bit on this pack, all spin a little bit in this guy, spin a little bit in this guy, and all the way through, and I was killing stuff, that would be fucking cool, man. That'd be sick. But I'm not. These dungeons are not populated enough. At T3 Nightmare Tier 50 plus dungeons, I'm walking from the entrance of the dungeon over here. I'm walking. Oh, attack a mob with an elite. Here, we'll kill it. Cool. Okay, walking. Obviously, these are smaller than the actual maps, right? But you spend all of this time here spent walking between packs with nothing going on. Kind of suck. They really kind of suck. And when you get a stretch that's like this, where you're walking all the way to this elite spawn here, and there's maybe one enemy pack that's like right here, because all of this on the way is just fucking empty nothing, it's not great, man. It's a Diablo game. We want to kill stuff. We want to attack things. We want to use our abilities, see the gore, churn these motherfuckers like butter, man. We want to kill these fuckers for invading our world. That's what it is. That is Diablo, man. We want to kill the monsters. But there's not enough monsters in these dungeons. And it makes them feel worse. It makes them feel very backtracky. It makes them feel like you do a lot of walking. Because once you kill the mobs, like let's say you miss something, or you just happen to walk past the mobs that were over here in this section, and you went this way, you would have to go here, all the way to here, check all the way back, and then walk all the way through, right? Like, you're doing a lot of walking and not a lot of playing in these dungeons. And I think that's a problem, especially in Nightmare dungeons, where, yeah, we want to play the game. Just like having to walk all the way the fuck to here, we don't want to go to the activity, we want to be doing an activity, right? Because I think Nightmare, the current end game loop is very poor, because you can get the best items in the game from just kind of doing whatever. While I think it is okay that you can, that for especially for casual players, being able to grind out a couple hours a day, kill some mobs, do some stuff, whatever. For everybody, I 100% believe that grinding a normal dungeon, the dungeons that continue to get nerfed over and over again because the endgame activities aren't rewarding, that it sucks. Nobody wants to grind the same fucking dungeon 80 billion hundred fucking times because it's the most efficient thing to do, and they're not getting good drops anywhere else, so they just gotta keep hitting the fucking slot machine, hoping to get something decent while also trying to get some XP, right? So because of that, I think what Nightmare dungeons actually give you needs to be reworked and adjusted as a whole. I think the entire world, which would also benefit and go with the level scaling argument I had earlier, should be stopped at level about 80, which I spoke before, and the world should have its drops item power capped at like 740 or 730, 740. So they can be ancestral, they can have decent rolls on them. Depending on things like jewelry, they could potentially be BIS items if they drop with the right stat lines on a piece of jewelry that is ancestral. But when you start doing these Nightmare dungeons, let's say the entire world stops scaling at 730 item power, right? Then when you go into these Nightmare dungeons, if you're doing 30s to 40s, it's going to be dropping item power brackets from 760 to 770. And if you do 40s to 50s, it would be 770s to maybe 785, because it's a bit of a jump and mobs are starting to go above a level 100. And if you go into 50s to 60s, oh, maybe they're 785 to 790, maybe 790, right? You can see that even though there can be items in the open world that you get that are strong, your path to progression by doing these nightmare dungeons goes boop and then boop, boop. You can try and push yourself a little higher, do a little harder content than the gear you have to really be able to do these nightmare dungeons effectively, right? But as you're doing these things, you go doot, 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 and then you're just, that's the progression loop, right? You get some decent gear, you push a little more, you push a little more, you push a little more. Oh shit, you're doing... Then once you're getting to like 80s and 90s, when things are like level 130 and they're really fucking hard and they're hitting you really hard, then oh, okay, we'll start grinding around like maybe it's the 50 to 60s or 60s to 70s. We'll start really grinding that out, getting those minor upgrades, getting those stat bonuses. Then we can push into that 80 to 90 range and then really grind that out to get those bonuses to work your way towards 100, right? That I think is a good end game where you're gaining power, you're gaining strength, you're gaining stuff on your glyphs, you're doing harder content that provides better rewards, better item power, and a higher chance at better loot. And as you're doing these higher item power tiers, like if you're doing 40s and 50s and 50s to 60s, through these higher tiers of dungeons, I think you should also have a higher drop rate of unique items specifically, so you can find, so doing harder content also potentially rewards you with some of these more build-defining items that you might be looking for. As an end game loop, I think that's where the game would really be, at least in this base form, at its strongest. I'm not sure exactly what other activities towards the end game I would personally like to see when we start moving towards seasonal content. But with these changes, I think it would provide a more meaningful and enjoyable progression through the game, where you get up through, you can do World Tier 1 or 2, you do your level 50 capstone dungeon in World Tier 2, you grind up, and in World Tier 3, you also have sacred level nightmare dungeons that you can do, right? So you're doing World Tier 3, you're doing those nightmare dungeons, you're grinding up, then you eventually get to level 70, you beat Elias at level 70 again, you get into Tier 4, and then you start doing that big grind, with the end goal being maybe Uber Lilith, and once you can farm Uber Lilith, maybe she has a really high chance at dropping really good or decent or unique, or have specific unique items dedicated to her that could be build defining in a really difficult fight. Stuff like that. That kind of, the carrot to chase, the things to do, right? I think would be really, really cool and really, really fun for the game as a whole. Because right now, the most efficient thing to do, the best way to get loot, is to find whatever dungeon they have not nerfed yet, and then go farm the elites in that dungeon, and then move on to the next thing. The main reason why people are also farming these dungeons is for experience more than anything else. These dungeons have a these dungeons have a significantly higher mob density ratio. So obviously they're more mobs, more loot, more XP, right? That's why people really like running these dungeons as well, because there's just more stuff to kill. There's more game to play. That's why people like playing Diablo. They want to shred through stuff, right? That's what they want to do. So, because experience is something that I think is also very important to the core gameplay as you're leveling to 100, because when you get to a certain point, you can only get to level 100, and mobs will still scale above you. So when you're fighting something that's level 130, they have bonus damage and reduced damage taken from you. So experience is a very necessary commodity to do any form of in-game content, regardless. So I think that these nightmare dungeons should also have an additional XP modifier added to them. Currently, the additional experience you get from running a nightmare dungeon is the fact that the monsters are higher level. There's no bonus experience for doing that. There is no there is no positive dungeon affix, like you see find 30 more gold, the evade, critical strike. There is no positive dungeon affix that can give you bonus experience, which might be something they can look at and things people can re-roll and farm for. Because what you can do as an in-game activity is you and 3 other friends can group up, you can all go craft a couple of these sigils, a couple people get some bonus XP, and then you can level together efficiently through group play with the bonus experience you get from these nightmare sigils. I think that would be a way better thing to do. It would incentivize people to group together as well, because the resource used to craft these sigils is also very limited. It's not very limited, but it's limited enough where you're not going to really, as a solo player, be able to sit there and spam, try and craft something just for bonus experience. That way you want to run, and it incentivizes you to play with other people so you can get more chances at that bonus experience, that kind of thing, right? That's why I think they should really focus on having these nightmare dungeons as currently like the base variant of their end-game loop be way better than they should be. Which also ties into me talking about them nerfing everything but not buffing anything. Because if they want to nerf all of these dungeons people are trying to do because they enjoy them, because they're efficient, because they're good, if the developers don't want that, that's fine. Nerf them. But please compensate for allowing people to do harder content to get better rewards. I could farm in this pre-nerf dungeon here, this ruins dungeon. I could have easily farmed to 100 by now. I could have farmed the past couple days before they nerfed it and been 100 at a relative pace. But now that's gone, and all I have are the nerf dungeons, which aren't as great, and I have these nightmare dungeons. But the nightmare dungeons don't really provide bonus. So you see where I'm going with it. They just need to really reinforce and reward players for doing end game activity. That's really what that's what they need to do, man. Because if they want people to interact with these systems, players will take the path of least resistance. And sometimes the path of least resistance doesn't have to be easy. It can be challenging. But if it's rewarding, players will want to do that instead. The last thing I want to touch on as far as like potential solutions overall is the build diversity of the game currently. Right now, every class has 1, maybe 2 builds. And of those builds, a lot of classes are using primarily a bunch of buff skills and then a good damage skill, is what most classes are running now. Like you have Ice Shards for Sork, which you're running Flame Shield, Barrier, Ice Nova, the Ice Block Ultimate, Teleport, and then all of your damage is coming from some chain reactions and Ice Shards. Like Ice Shards is the damage. Which when you start playing ARPGs and you play stuff like PoE, generally your builds start kind of focusing around one thing, which I think is fine. But because they've done all of these nerfs and none of these buffs, a lot of these other skills, like Double Swing, Upheaval, Bash, I've barely seen anyone use Frenzy. Like, a lot of these other skills just aren't being used and aren't being that effective. Also, actually, let me just move on to that part. Then we'll talk about Leap. One of the things that what I think will promote build diversity as things go on is additional legendary effects. For example, having 48% additional crit chance on Whirlwind is crazy strong, especially when I'm gaining a lot of bonus critical damage from all of my gear, bonus critical damage to vulnerable enemies as another modifier. Having all of that crit is a crazy amount of bonus damage. But if I look at, say, something like Double Swing, right? Also, another negative, there's no search bar anywhere. No search bar for anything. I now have to look individually through all of these to then find the double swing legendary effect, just so I can kind of point it out to you. Where is the double swing effect? Yeah, bleeding, injured, subable. Where's the double swing effect? There is a double swing legendary effect. Whatever, I don't know where it is. But some legendary effects are certainly made better than others. So if we talk about the leap legendary effect, like Hammer of the this one for Hammer of the Ancients, one of the reasons why Hammer of the Ancients is a decent build is because when you have this legendary effect and it's at its max level, which is 50% of its damage, is also quaked outwards towards enemies. When you put that on a two-handed weapon, it has 100% bonus scaling to it. So you're doing 100% of the Hammer of the Ancients damage in a wide area, which makes the skill pretty good. Well, if you go to something like Leap, where is it? Right here. You have each time a core skill deals direct damage to an enemy, your next charge or leap deals increased damage up to 225. Okay, that's a little bit of damage. And then there's also the effect that when you... Where is the other leap effect? I want to talk a little bit about leap. One that gives you damage reduction when you stand and leap. Yeah, this one. Leap creates an earthquake that deals X amount of damage over 4 seconds, and while standing in it, you gain damage reduction. So you go, okay, well, I'll make a build where I'll stack up leap, and then I'll leap, and then they'll be in the earthquake, and they'll take a lot of damage, but when you leap, you knock everything away from you. And that earthquake is just gone and doesn't do anything. A lot of the reason the build diversity isn't here in the game is because there's not enough legendary aspects to allow you to have strong builds centered around different skills. So I think as the game develops, as it goes on, as they add legendary aspects to the game, that is when some more of the build diversity will come out, because now the build diversity is pretty weak comparatively. That is also something, instead of set bonuses, I think I would rather see when they introduce new seasons, I think there should be seasonal legendary effects, which will allow you to play the game differently using those seasonal legendary effects and scale and build differently. Which, because if they had, you only have your 5 gear pieces, right? So if they had set bonuses, and those set bonuses were good, you would have only one way to play. But by giving you seasonal legendary effects, it allows you to play different builds alongside the current amount of base legendary effects that we have, and that will promote more build diversity per season, and that's kind of, I think, where the game is really going to get going if they go that route. So build diversity right now is a bit weak, but I think it has potential later on as they add more legendary effects that are actually good. Because currently the upheaval legendary effects are pretty lackluster. Like, there's a legendary effect where if you have Call of the Ancients on your bar, there's a chance that whenever you cast Upheaval, the ghost will spawn and cast a second Upheaval. But one of the bigger problems with that is that you then lose you lose Unstoppable and additional Berserking. So you lose the Berserking damage bonus on top of losing CC immunity, which you need that. So that will probably, or hopefully will be something that they look at in the coming seasons. But as my overall takeaway, I think that when they start improving this game and improving the end game loop, they really need to start buffing things, so people have other things they might want to play, things they're interested in. The end game loop needs to be adjusted, and Nightmare Dungeons as the current end game activity and potential in-game activity to come for different seasons needs to really be adjusted and improved, because the rewards for doing nightmare dungeons being just glyph XP isn't really that tantalizing of a reward. They really need better drop rates, better item power, and potentially even, or not potentially, they do need better experience rates for these nightmare dungeons to really add a tiered end game for players and a new carrot for them to chase. Because they, even though they're doing these different end game tiers, right, they're still going to need the items to drop because of the enchantment system. You can only reroll one stat line. They're still going to need items to drop with minimum 3 decent lines on an item in a correct slot with the correct lines, and those lines have to be better rolled than the lines they already have. There's enough RNG already that sort of endgame loop will keep people interested, and by also adjusting the level requirement for some of this gear, I think people will have a lot more fun and will probably play a little more when they can make different characters and build different characters and classes by using some of the gear they have acquired on their main character to be able to help and buff those other characters. Like, for example, some of these are, like this gear here, you see it says Barbarian. That means only Barbarians can wear it, which is fine. Because some of the other gear you drop, like the jewelry you drop, or some of the swords, don't have that required Barbarian tag. So it'll allow you to get those characters a little better jump started. Like, having a brand new character with good move speed on boots is night and day in how it feels to play. So I think those things need to be looked at for the overall health and longevity of the game. Now, I did rant a bunch. This is my conclusion section or whatever. But I did rant a decent amount. I tried not to. I tried to stick to this kind of, not necessarily script, but this whole fucking thing that I wrote out. I tried to kind of keep a bit to it. But I think this game has a lot of potential. I've had a ton of fun playing it. I still enjoy playing it with my friends and getting different cosmetics. And I just got, by farming Legion events, I just got the Ghost Horse today. I think the Ghost Horse is super cool, and I like it, and I'm glad I got it, and I'm glad I farmed for it. So, yeah, it's just that I did complain and talk about a lot of things, but the core here, the metal, the rock solid core that this game has is really good, man. It's really, really good. It's really fun. They just need to look at some of the end game activities. They need to adjust their transparency with how they talk to players and communicating with why they're nerfing stuff. If they said, hey man, look, we're going to nerf these dungeons, give us like another week or two to figure out how we want to buff nightmare dungeons to compensate, but this is what we're planning on doing. So it gives players something to look forward to, the communication is there, all that good stuff, right? I know there is certainly fear with communicating intentions, especially with gamers, because gamers see any form of communication and take it as a promise when it sometimes just won't work. Sometimes they want to try something and it just won't work. So they fear sharing these things. They fear giving exact details to things because they think it'll really upset the player base. And to some players it does. But I think that kind of open communication for any game, any live service game especially, is very, very important. A lot of players, I think, are now getting towards not necessarily the end game, but in the next couple weeks, even the more casual players are going to start feeling what a lot of people that have played a lot of the game have been talking about. So I don't really have much else to say on it. I hope and I think I touched on almost everything I wanted to. There are other small things to touch on, like why are the gems clogging up my inventory instead of in their own little tab? That's kind of annoying. I think the fact that they gave us this wardrobe system is super great. The fact that they let us buy additional stash tabs with in-game currency and not premium currency, I'm assuming these open spaces will probably, like PoE, be filled with with additional purchasable stash tabs. I just hope that they're not too expensive, and I hope that they don't hide stuff like a aspect tab or a gem tab behind microtransactions in that way. If it's not too expensive, like if they're throwing $3 or $4 to something like that, right? If I could buy $10 and get a gem tab and an aspect tab, and they would categorize and sort my aspects, I think that would be cool, like PoE does it. But those things might be okay as microtransactions, but there's still things like the search bar that really needs to be a base feature, because there are things like, for example, I have the conceded aspect here, the barrier aspect. Oh, then I have an expectant. But why do I have another conceded barrier aspect here? These things are not ordered by their items, they're just ordered by type. So even though I want them to be sorted, they're not sorted by type and strength, they're simply just of their different types, which suck to look through, and it wouldn't suck if I just had a search bar and could type conceded, or I could type expectant in a search bar here. A limitation is a potential limitation of this stuff is, unfortunately, yeah, some of these things are probably designed with console in mind. I know that's a thing a lot of people that play on PC hear that and go, ugh, right? Nobody wants to hear that shit. I don't want to hear that shit. I played a lot of Final Fantasy XIV, and there's a significant amount of limitations in Final Fantasy XIV because they had to keep the console. I know PC players don't like to hear that shit, but it is potentially a reality of some of these things. But most players can probably go into a menu like they would on a PS5 on YouTube and just go in the menu and type and have things highlight. I'm sure console players would appreciate that just as much as... Whoa. How long was that? 57 minutes? 57 minutes. That is insane amount of time. Holy fuck. Who's gonna watch this? If you watch this, more power to you, man. More power to you. Let me know what you think. Like and subscribe, and I don't want to say. I don't care about that shit. If you want to leave a comment, I'll look at it and see what you have to say. But otherwise, if you got this far somehow, thanks for watching. I hope you enjoyed the game as much as I do. I wouldn't sit here and talk about this game that just came out for almost an hour if I thought it was a bad game. So, thank you very much for your time. I hope you have a good day, and I will see you in Sanctuary in Season 1. Bye!